Alright, this lesson is on how to create a basic animation. We're going to go ahead and start by taking a look at the items that we have in our library, as those are the items that we basically are able to animate. We have a simple background and we have a fairy. Our background is going to be our stationary item. It's going to be the environment that stays in place. So we're going to learn how to create that in the timeline. And then we're also going to learn about how to move an item on the stage, just simple movement like moving the fairy from one part of the stage to another part of the stage so that you can see the animation, okay? All right, so first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you remember, as explained in one of the earlier videos, that anytime that you have a symbol that you want to animate, you need to have it on its own separate layer. Okay, so if I want two different symbols animating in opposite directions or doing something different, each one of those symbols has to go in its own separate layer. But if the symbols are stationary, not moving or changing in any way, like say the stationary background here, then you can make up a background with many different symbols on one layer since they won't be moving, okay? In our case, we drew all of our objects that make up our background and put it in one symbol like the tree, the wall, and the ground here, which is also fine since ultimately it's only one symbol. Alright, the only way you determine which to use, one background symbol with a bunch of objects like we've done here versus a bunch of symbols put together on one layer that will remain separately, is basically whether or not you plan to animate the separate pieces in that background, okay? So for example, I know that I don't need this tree to walk away from the background or my wall to move away from my floor in my animation. So putting it all in one symbol like I've done is just fine, okay? But if you plan on the objects moving separate from one another, then it's better to create separate layers and separate symbols for all of those objects, okay? So in theory, you could technically build this background with the wall as one symbol, the ground is another symbol, and the tree is another symbol. Okay, and then just drag them and drop them on the stage and position them to create your background, okay? But because we're not animating the background pieces separately in our animation, we've chosen not to do that route. We don't need it. Okay, so we're going to create one layer for the background and one layer for the fairy. This one is already here, so I'm just going to go ahead and name this background. I just double-clicked here. I'm going to call it background, okay? And then I'm going to create a new layer down here. And I'm going to rename it fairy. Okay, so I have two different layers, one for the stationary background and one for the fairy. Okay, so I'm going to go to the background layer and I'm just going to go into my library panel and I'm going to grab the item from the library. Either just you can grab it from here or you can grab it from up here. I'm going to go ahead and drag it from here. All right. And I'm going to position it in place where I want it to be when I start my animation, okay? Anything that's off of the stage will not be visible to your viewer once you render the movie. Right now, it's just whatever falls off is going to be ignored, okay? So what we need to focus on is what's inside the stage. All right, so you placed it into place. If you needed to, you could shrink it, you know, you can resize it using your scale tool, you know, to fit and stuff, okay? Mine just happens to be the right size. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that there. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring in my fairy. So I'm going to go to my fairy layer, and then I'm going to go here, and notice if I click on it, I get the little preview. I can just grab it, and this time I'm going to drag it on here, and I just drag it onto the stage, okay? A common mistake, people try to drag this and throw it into the timeline. Timeline is more of a metaphorical thing so that you have an idea of where things are and where they're moving in time, but really what you want to do is throw it onto the stage. It actually will not allow you to throw it in here. See, nothing's going to happen. All right, now we have these two items, okay? You want to decide what you want your animation to look like when you begin, and that's what basically is going to be in this first frame here, all right? I want to decide that this fairy isn't going to be here at the very start of the movie, so I'm going to go ahead and throw her off the stage. Again, none of this stuff off the stage. The stage is back here, this white area. I'm going to undo that. Anything that's off of the stage is basically not going to be seen by your viewer. So I'm going to have her start off the stage and then eventually she's going to start moving into the space. Okay? So here we are, we're at one frame and basically this is only visible for 1/12 of a second, okay, based on my movie. See under properties here, this is going to be set to 12 frames per second, which means this one frame in my timeline where my fairy's at It's only 1/12 of the second, okay? So I want to decide is how long do I want this background to be visible for? Like, do I want this animation sequence to last, 5 seconds, 2 seconds? And in my mind, I'm just going to say, I want this animation to last 3 seconds. So I say 3 seconds multiplied by 12 frames, and I put myself at 36 frames here, and that means that 3 seconds have elapsed from here to here. And I usually try to control my background first so that I know where I'm moving my object later on within this environment. So I need it to be visible first, okay? So I go to this frame, which is frame 36, and I'm going to just basically extend my timeline or add frames of the same stationary background, okay? I'm going to go ahead and go here. I can right click, okay, or control click on a Mac, and you can insert frames, okay? Just insert a frame. And what that basically did is just extended that part of my timeline. Now you'll notice that the fairy is only visible here off the stage. It's actually not really even visible in the movie, but it's only visible here within this first frame. And as I move on, even just to the second frame, it disappears. And now you'll see that the background is just stationary within those 36 frames, which is equal to 3 seconds, okay? So this is how you just simply make something become visible. You place it on the stage where you want it to start, and then you insert a frame by right-clicking and insert the frame to the point where you had designated as your endpoint, okay? If I wanted to add more to this, I could just simply go to the end of this and scroll. On a PC, you should get an arrow indicating that you can extend this further. On a Mac, if you hold down Command, you can get that arrow and then extend it further, okay? If you wanted to, like this, and it would extend it, or you could shrink it back. Okay? All right. So those are the ways to extend the frame, make something just visible. All right? Currently, both of these you'll notice, the fairy, which is only visible on frame 1, and the background, which is visible for 3 seconds, 36 frames, is just stationary. We know this because it's gray and because we haven't told it to animate. So what I'm going to do is this fairy, I want her to come in, but I want her to come in a different manner than just straight across. Straight across is pretty easy. We're going to do that. And then we're going to modify it so that she kind of goes up and down and moves around, okay? So what we want to do is we want to do the same thing we did for this one here. We just want to extend the frame. All right, we're going to go, I'm just going to put it here. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to insert the frame. So now we've told it be visible. Notice now she's staying up there for 36 frames or 3 seconds. All right. To make her animate, to tell her that you want her to do something, what you want to do is tell these frames that they're going to be animated. Okay. And so I can just click anywhere, any of these frames for that particular layer, and I can right click, control click on a Mac, and I can say create motion tween. And now what you'll notice is that this particular item became blue. Blue is basically telling you that this particular item is ready or activated, so to speak, to begin animating whatever it is you tell it to do. Here you could tell it to move, you could tell it to grow, you could tell it to shrink, you could tell it to rotate, you could tell it to do whatever it is that you want. In this particular case, since this is just a basic movement example, we're just going to make it move, okay? So now at this point in time, what you want to keep in mind is you can either animate slowly as you go, like just select here and then tell it to move a little place and then move here and tell it to move somewhere else. You can kind of do it as you go. Or what I like to do is I like to say, okay, by the end of the 3 seconds, where do I want this to end up? And that's what I end up doing to my character, okay? So I go to the very end of my movie, or at least of this sequence here, because there might be more movie off later on. I say I want at 36 frames here. I select that frame. Notice it's highlighted now. All right. I want this object to be over here. So I'm going to go here. And then what I have to do is with my black arrow, I have to physically grab it and drag it and position it where I want it to be at the end of my sequence. Okay. And now what you'll notice is if we scrub the timeline here, I'm just moving this back over here. It created all of the steps between the beginning and the end. Okay. Basically where I told it I wanted it to start, designated by this keyframe here, and where I wanted it to end, which is this end keyframe here, okay? And now what I can do is any time in this particular part of the timeline, which is represented by this here, I can go, see here, this is where she's at, I can just grab this and move it where I want her to go, And notice it just inserted a keyframe. All right, and here, if I want to change the path in between here, I can just either grab her and move her. Notice it created another keyframe. Or if I want to change kind of the slope of this, I can go directly to the path. And this in particular, like say here, when she's here, if I want her to move, I can just grab the line and move it here. And now she's going to arch. When I move the line, the guide here that's guiding it, it's not going to insert a keyframe. But when I physically grab her and move her, say that I go over here and I say I want her to dip down, if I grab her and I dip her, it'll insert a keyframe. But I can always change this even so that it kind of slopes. All right. So I can change my guide at any point. And any time that there's one of these keyframes, I'm basically telling it that something significantly different, like a change in location, is going to happen. I can just modify it by going to an existing frame. I can change that one, and it won't add a new one. It'll just keep whatever's there. Okay? All right. So I'm going to go to the beginning, and I can either scrub to see what's happening, or if I kind of want to play it, I can hit return, and I can see it happen. Okay? Now, notice that was a little slow. If you wanted to go faster, you could shrink the amount of time that it takes. And just moving this back in here. Okay. And here I'm going to have to hold down the command key. All right. This is just on a Mac. And I can shorten it. And then what happens is that the less amount of time here that it happens, return, the faster it goes. Okay. And notice all of my keyframes shrink accordingly. Okay. Similarly, if I wanted to grow this and make this actually take even longer, I could go all the way over here. Okay. And this one, when they're not animated, when they're not motion tweens, you have to hold down command. There we go. Then we go to the beginning. I'm going to hit return. All right. Now this isn't real time. Again, if you want to really test the movie, you could either publish it, file, publish the preview, and either publish the Flash or the HTML. Or what you could do is you could go into Control and test the movie here. Okay. Notice it just loops back around. So unless we tell the movie to stop, which we'll be learning later on in some simple actions, it's going to keep looping around. Okay, but we'll ignore that for right now. Now, one thing to keep in mind, just things that you want to be aware of. For simple movement, all we need, notice all our items here, our symbols, are what we call graphic symbols. You could tell that by this graphic icon. If this were a movie clip, I'm going to just right-click it really quick, go into Properties. I could change this to a movie clip, and just so that you can see, the icon changes to this, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. For basic movement, all you need is a basic graphic clip. And I encourage people to create everything as a graphic clip and then only convert it or change the instance of it to a movie clip, okay, when needed. All right. Right now we don't need this, so I'm not going to show you how to convert these exactly. I'm going to wait until I have to show you an example on that, okay? All right. Next thing. Say that you want something to come in, like another fairy, like her twin fairy, to come in, but at a different point in time. You don't want it to start at the beginning. By default, when you create a new layer for the second fairy, okay, I just created a new layer for the second fairy. I'm going to call it Fairy 2, okay? It doesn't matter where the location is here unless it's going to overlap something. But this one isn't going to overlap, but I'm still going to move it to the top. I just like to kind of sequentially put things in the order that I'm going to see them, okay? So I'm going to put it in the top here. I'm going to grab another instance of the fairy, and I'm going to drag her in here, all right? Now she's going to come in from this direction here, all right, from this direction. She's not going to come in reverse, so I'm just going to rotate her really quick. I just grab my transform tool. I'm going to move her over this way, okay? All right, so I have her here, and right now, because the movie was already created and all these scenes were animated here, basically what happens is that when I insert an item like this number 2 fairy, it's going to create it from the very beginning to the very end here, okay? And that's fine if I wanted her to show up at the very beginning, but honestly, I didn't really want that to happen, okay? So I'm going to undo, and I'm going to show you what I want to happen. I want her to show up at about 36, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and undo her. All right. And I'm going to say I want her to show up here at this point in time, okay? She won't be on the stage, but that's when I'm going to begin animating her in. She's actually going to reside off stage. So I'm going to right click here. I'm going to insert a keyframe, okay? And notice it just kind of cut my timeline here. Because there was already an empty keyframe in here, when I create here, from here to here, there's going to be empty section. And then at this point, I'm just going to make sure I'm selected in that. That's basically telling it that something special or something different is going to happen at this time. Okay, it's the equivalent of these down here, except for I manually went in there and made it. Okay, so I created it. Now when I grab her, okay, I'm going to grab the fairy. I'm going to drag her in here. All right, I'm going to position her off the stage. Notice now there's only gray area. She's only visible within this area here, okay? Now I'm going to go ahead and rotate her. I want to do all of this first, all of these rotations and anything the way that I want her to be, whether I want her to be big or small to begin with. I'm going to make her actually larger. She's a twin that overgrew a little bit, all right? And basically she's going to be that size for this whole thing here, okay? So now when I want to animate her, I just need to go and tell her that she's basically going to be an animation. And I'm going to right click anywhere on these frames. It doesn't matter which one at this point. And I'm going to say create motion tween. Right now it's blue. Now it's activated. Now I could either go in here and manually say at this point in time I want her to move here. And then I want her to go a little bit more in the time. I want her to be here. And then I want her to go, you know, like this. Or I could do it the way that I did it to begin with, where I went and I designated my endpoint first. And then changed everything in between. Up to you. Don't think you're doing it wrong if you're not doing it in a particular order, okay? I'm going to just move her. Notice insert to keyframe. And then I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to switch back to my basic move tool here. And I'm going to modify some of these here. Oops. There we go. So now if we look at this, she's not visible here, the fairy number 2, and she'll become visible here. She's going to be moving, fairy number 1 is going to be moving from the left into the right, and fairy number 2 is going to be moving in from the right into the left. Okay, so I'm just going to put it here. I'm going to hit return. Okay, all right. All right, this concludes your lesson on how to animate, basic movement animation, how to enter another item at a different specific point in time in the timeline. If you have any questions, make sure to contact me.